Sitting in O'Hare International Airport in Chicago wasn't the most pleasant way to pass an evening, thought Ethan Thorne as he observed the boarding process for what he hoped would be his flight back home to Atlanta. Ethan, along with his two brothers, co-owned a small manufacturing company established by their father many years ago. Their father had designed a line of specialized, yet rarely used, industrial machines that kept the business profitable, but never presented much room for expansion. Both parents had passed away, and Ethan had spent the last few days in Chicago negotiating the sale of the company to a large corporate entity. Ethan, along with his attorneys and representatives, had finalized a deal today, leaving them to complete the remaining contractual details. Ethan was eager to get home that evening, but it seemed unlikely. The final flight of the day to Atlanta was fully booked, and he was number 3 on the standby list. He hadn't reached out to his wife, Caroline, because he wasn't sure what to say. He lingered at a bar where he could view the gate and sipped his second whiskey sour, contemplating the agreement and the money he and his brothers would divide, something over $12 million for him alone. Moreover, a well-paid transition period with the new company promised a fresh start for him and Caroline. Their twin boys were already out of the house, or at least on their way. Both were enrolled in college as seniors at Emory University, where the tuition had been a heavy financial burden. That would all change once the sale closed. In the meantime, the boarding process was wrapping up, and the gate agents were leading the last passengers through the jetway. Then, as if by a stroke of luck, the boarding screen updated, and Ethan saw his name listed as having cleared the standby. He dropped cash on the bar counter, gave a quick nod to the bartender who acknowledged him with a smile, grabbed his briefcase and carry-on, and jogged to the gate. The gate agent handed him a boarding pass and quickly explained to him and 2 other standby passengers that a family of 4 who had checked in online never showed up, so they were granted the seats. Ethan hurried down the jetway with his new companions, and as he reached the boarding door, he realized he had scored a first-class seat. A good omen, he mused, settling into the plush leather chair. He felt a wave of optimism, maybe that meant the deal would truly go through without a hitch. As the boarding door closed and the flight attendant inquired if he'd like something to drink, he figured he'd earned one more and ordered another whiskey sour. Then, he drifted off, dreaming about the future for him and Caroline, a future where they could always travel in comfort and style. The jolt and screech of the landing roused him. He eventually found himself at the taxi stand, waiting for a cab. He had driven his SUV to the airport a few days prior, but now he was drained, slightly tipsy, and it was way too late to ask Caroline to pick him up. They lived a short distance outside Atlanta, so the cab ride was long enough for him to nod off again. The driver had to shake him awake once they arrived. Ethan paid the fare and handed over a generous tip before sluggishly stepping out of the cab. It had been a long, demanding day and half the night, and all he wanted now was to crawl into bed with Caroline. But as the cab reversed down the driveway and he turned toward the house, something caught his eye that halted him in his tracks. A silver Audi was parked in the driveway, blocking his usual spot in front of the garage. To Ethan, it seemed like an overly luxurious vehicle. But then, most Audis looked expensive to him. The house itself was dark, it was past midnight at this point, and Ethan stood there for a few moments, perplexed. He had spoken with Caroline from his lawyer's office earlier that day, and she hadn't mentioned expecting any overnight guests. He tried to suppress the disturbing thoughts, yearning to envision a pleasant outcome where he would soon be cuddling with a warm, drowsy Caroline in just a few moments. His mind wasn't complying, though, so he cautiously walked to the entrance in the breezeway between the garage and the house. He unlocked it, stepped into the quiet home, and crept through the kitchen and up the stairs to his and Caroline's bedroom. The bedroom door stood ajar, clearly not expecting any guests. Ethan stepped inside and felt a surge of disbelief crash over him. His mind seemed to freeze as he absorbed the scene in front of him. Caroline was fast asleep, her body sprawled out on her side of the bed, one arm draped over a man who was also in a deep sleep, a faint smile etched across his face. Ethan stood there, seemingly paralyzed in the moment, until his thoughts slowly began to stir again. He looked once more at Caroline's arm lying over the man, her hand resting gently on his chest. No wonder the guy was smiling in his sleep. They were both snoring softly, and that shattered Ethan's heart. Before tonight, he had cherished Caroline's gentle snoring, which reminded him of a calming hum. He used to believe it meant she felt secure and deeply content in their shared life. He had often drifted off to sleep with that comforting sound in his ears, but now it felt like a distant echo of a lost past. As Ethan's thoughts sharpened, he noticed the man's clothes neatly folded on a chair where he himself had sat countless times. A small, scorching rage began to smolder within him. He picked up the pants and extracted the wallet and car keys, pausing to think. He could grab a golf club from the hallway closet and confront the man, but he understood that, while it might provide temporary satisfaction, it could lead to more serious issues down the road. A different idea began to form in his mind. He took out his phone and snapped several incriminating photos. After capturing the proof, he collected the man's clothes and shoes. The intruder was a big guy. Ethan was 5 feet 11 inches and around 175 pounds, whereas this man appeared to be at least 4 or 5 inches taller and likely 50 pounds heavier. Engaging him with a golf club might not have been a smart move. Holding the clothes and shoes, Ethan glanced one last time at his wife, the woman he had cherished, the mother of his beloved sons, and braced himself against the love that had kept him grounded for over 20 years. He left the bedroom, still tearless, and descended the stairs to the garage. The key beeped as the Audi's doors unlocked. Ethan placed his briefcase and carry-on inside and slid into the driver's seat. He had never been a fan of high-end cars, but as he sat in the smooth leather interior, he realized it felt surprisingly comfortable. Figuring out the controls, he shifted the car into gear and drove off. After about a mile, he pulled over to inspect the man's wallet. Inside were the usual items, some cash, business cards, and an ID that identified the man as Jackson Hale, a senior account manager at a local Audi dealership, with a driver's license showing a residence in Atlanta. If Jackson had a family there, Ethan pondered, he could cause some serious problems, not just for Jackson, but possibly for Caroline as well. Feeling utterly drained, Ethan decided to check into a nearby motel for the night. Meanwhile, Caroline was an extremely cautious individual. She knew she wasn't as sharp as Ethan, but her carefulness had allowed her affair with Jackson to continue for nearly 5 months without arousing his suspicions. As she lay in bed the next morning with Jackson, she reflected on how he was satisfactory enough in bed, maybe not quite as good as Ethan, but the contrast outside of the bedroom was stark. She concluded that it was time to end the affair. She had relished the raw physicality of being with a man like Jackson, reminding her of the athletes she had dated back in college. However, Jackson was becoming overly attached, eager to spend the night with her. Although she had permitted it this time, she resolved that it would be the last. Caroline had intended to spend the rest of her life with Ethan, and having another man in their marital bed, even if Ethan never found out, felt like a betrayal too severe to justify. As the alarm blared at 7 a.m., she knew it was time for one last quick encounter. Afterward, they both headed to the shower. Back in her bedroom, Caroline was getting dressed when Jackson emerged from the guest room bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist. He paused for a moment, then asked, "Where did you put my clothes?" "I didn't move them anywhere," she replied, a touch of irritation in her voice. "They were right there on that chair." "But they're gone." "Did you take them into the guest room with you?" he asked, his voice trailing off as he tried to piece together what might have happened. "Maybe you left them downstairs when we came in last night," Caroline suggested, raising an eyebrow. "I'm certain I didn't, but I guess I'll go look," Jackson mumbled as he headed out of the bedroom. He returned in a rush, storming up the stairs. "Caroline, my car is gone. My clothes aren't downstairs. Somebody was here last night. They took my clothes, they stole my car. What the hell is going on?" Jackson's words spilled out in a frantic stream, and Caroline struggled to make sense of it all. How could his clothes and car be missing? They had been in the house together all night. Had someone broken in? All of a sudden, Caroline felt overwhelmed and sank onto the edge of the bed. What? Jackson asked, bewildered. Taking a deep breath to gather her thoughts, Caroline finally managed to say, "What if it was Ethan? What if he came home from Chicago while we were sleeping and took your stuff, and your car?" "Oh, crap," Jackson muttered, sinking down beside her. "You need to find out where he is. If he's still in Chicago, then we should call the cops. I've got to get my stuff back." Jackson's frustration was palpable. "If we call the cops, they'll want to know who owns the car, and it's titled in my wife's name for tax purposes." His voice faded as he considered the implications of their predicament. "I'll call his office. His assistant usually arrives early. She'll know where he is," Caroline said, pulling out her phone. She dialed Ethan's office, and even though it was early, his secretary answered promptly. "Ethan Thorne's office, how may I help you?" "Hi, Jenna, it's Caroline. I know it's really early, but I'm not sure where Ethan is. He didn't call last night. Have you heard from him?" "It is early, and I know the team in Chicago worked late last night. They're probably just getting a late start today. I spoke with Ethan around 6 o'clock yesterday. He mentioned that they were making good progress and might have a deal today." "That's good to hear. So, he's still in Chicago?" "Yes, I'm sure of it. I expect to hear from him as soon as they all return to the office. Would you like me to ask him to give you a call?" "Yes, please, but only if he has the time. I understand how critical this deal is." "Okay, I'll do that. Take care. Bye." After ending the call, Caroline turned to Jackson. "Ethan is still in Chicago. We need to consider calling 911 to report a break-in and car theft." "Caroline, what exactly are we going to tell them?" "That your lover had his clothes stolen from your bedroom and his car from your driveway. We're in a serious mess here." "Okay, I get it. Let's think this through. How about I drive you to your house? You can change there and report the thefts as if they happened while your wife was taking the kids to school. Maybe skip mentioning the stolen clothes, that part might be harder to explain than the car. Except I told my wife I was going to Detroit for a meeting about the new Audi A6 and wouldn't be home until this afternoon. The plan could still work. We just wait until noon when I'd normally be coming back. You drop me off at home, I leave the keys in the car because it was a quick stop, and my car gets stolen while I'm inside the house. You know, I think that might actually work. I could say I left my wallet in the car, and they took that too. We can hang out here for a few hours, and maybe get cleaned up again." "Okay, I need to call in sick for work," Caroline said. She worked as a legal assistant at a small law firm. The work was tolerable but somewhat tedious. She stepped into the hallway to make the call and returned to find Jackson lounging back in bed, still wrapped in the towel. As she stood there, a fleeting moment of temptation crossed her mind, but she remembered her decision to end the affair. "Jackson," she said firmly, making no move to undress. "I think it's time to end this. We've had a good run, but it could have been Ethan last night. We were fortunate it was just a thief. Let's get you some clothes and maybe grab breakfast at a drive-thru." Jackson looked at her, contemplating whether to convince her otherwise, but he eventually realized that she was right. "Okay, I agree. It has been a good run. What about some clothes?" That turned out to be a challenge. Jackson was about 50 pounds heavier and 4 inches taller than Ethan. After some searching, Caroline found a pair of old, ragged sweatpants that sort of fit him after cutting some material at the waist and tying shoelaces around his middle. She also located a faded sweatshirt that had shrunk in the wash and altered it to fit him. They decided to watch TV until it was time to head to Jackson's house. Earlier that morning, just as Jackson was discovering his missing clothes and car, Ethan had pulled into the driveway at the address on Jackson's driver's license. A nice house that seemed to harbor many secrets. Ethan sat in the car for a moment, observing the well-kept home, noting a small bicycle leaning against the side of the garage. He had spent the night in a motel and had gone for a run at dawn. To his surprise, he wasn't feeling any worse, maybe he was still numb. He approached the front door holding Jackson's wallet with the driver's license clearly visible and rang the doorbell. A young woman in her 20s answered the door. Ethan wore a rumpled suit from the previous day, hoping he didn't come across as too intimidating. He held up the driver's license and gestured toward the silver Audi parked outside. Before he could speak, the woman slammed the door but then quickly reopened it, clutching her cell phone. "I have 911 on speed dial unless you tell me my husband is okay." "Ma'am, I have a picture of your husband and my wife together last night," Ethan responded honestly. "I don't think your husband is okay, and I don't think my wife is either. If you want to call 911, go ahead. I'll just wait in the car." They exchanged a tense moment of silence until her expression softened, and she opened the door wider. "Come in," she murmured before disappearing into the kitchen at the sound of a child calling for her. Ethan waited in the living room, and when she returned, she handed him a cup of coffee. "I hope you drink it black. I have to get my kids ready for school right now. I trust you more than I trust my husband." "Okay," Ethan replied, nodding. "I think we're both in a pretty rough situation." She hurried off to get her kids ready, briefly introducing Ethan as a friend of Daddy's before ushering them out the door. Left alone, he sat and sipped the coffee, debating whether to call his office but ultimately staying still. When she returned downstairs, she looked more composed, her hair neatly combed, and a touch of makeup applied. "Sorry about the chaos earlier. I'm Molly Hale, currently married to Jackson Hale, who is involved with the woman you're married to." Ethan chuckled at her choice of words, feeling a slight sense of relief. "You're absolutely right. I'm Ethan Thorne, and my wife is Caroline Thorne." He described the events of the previous night, watching as tears gathered in Molly's eyes. "Caroline and I are getting a divorce, and I believe the photos will help me in that process. I can send them to you if you think they'd be useful." "Maybe I should have them," Molly said softly, her gaze distant. But then she hesitated. "No, don't send them. If I see them, I won't be able to forget. You keep them, and if I need them, I'll get in touch." "Sure," Ethan agreed, then added, "I might not be at my current job much longer, and I'll definitely be leaving my home soon. Let me give you my lawyer's contact information. You can reach him if you need those pictures or assistance with your divorce." "Thanks," Molly replied, but a curious look crossed her face. "What do we do now? Are you going to return the car? Are you waiting for Jackson? He was supposed to be in Detroit for a meeting. I think I'll hold on to the car until someone tells me to bring it back." Molly burst into laughter. "You know, I could write you a permission slip since the car is technically mine. If you get pulled over, the cops can call me to verify." Ethan liked the idea. "That actually sounds great. And we've had a series of break-ins in the area recently. If Jackson's keys and clothes are missing, and the spare key in the backyard is gone, when he shows up, he might try to get in. If our alarm system goes off, that could easily alert the police." "Honestly, Molly, I think I'm falling in love with your resourcefulness," Ethan said, genuinely impressed. "Okay, take it easy," Molly replied, shaking her head but smiling at his remark. "Jackson might wait until the kids and I are back from school later today, but I can take them to the park for a bit to give him more time to sort out whatever mess he's in. Please keep me posted, especially if he ends up in trouble with the police, and call me if you need anything with the car. I don't want you getting into any legal issues." Ethan nodded and then drove off in the silver Audi, wondering how much a car like this would cost in a different color. Molly had handed him the permission slip, and he assumed she would activate the alarm and leave for the day around noon. Meanwhile, back at Caroline's house, she dropped Jackson off at his place and sped away as if trying to distance herself from the whole situation. Jackson approached the front door, hoping it might be unlocked but also dreading what he'd find. Of course, it was locked, so he hurried around to the backyard to check the spot where they kept the spare key. It was gone. Perfect, he grumbled, contemplating whether he should break in. He tried the back door, but it was locked too. With no other choice, he resolved to force his way inside. He picked the family room window, the largest one, and grabbed a sturdy branch from a nearby tree. Using 2 chairs from the patio to avoid stepping directly onto the broken glass, he took a deep breath and swung the branch into the windowpane. It shattered with a loud crash, but the security alarm immediately blared. Unfortunately for him, a police cruiser just happened to be passing by at that very moment, thanks to Molly's earlier call about the recent neighborhood break-ins. Damn it, Jackson muttered, scrambling over the chairs to try and deactivate the alarm, but he was too late. Stop right there. Step away from the house slowly and keep your hands where we can see them, shouted one of the officers, guns drawn. Jackson complied, awkwardly backing away. Officers, I can explain, he began, but one cop cut him off, slapping handcuffs on him before he could finish. They recited his Miranda rights, and another officer asked if he had anything else to say. Yes, this is my house, and I don't have my key. I was just trying to get some clothes and call my office, he stammered, looking down at his mismatched attire. Do you have any identification? One of the officers asked. No. I lost my car and everything else. It's been a really rough morning, Jackson admitted, feeling the stress mounting. How did you lose your car? The officer pressed, narrowing his eyes. Jackson hesitated, unsure how much to divulge. I was staying at a friend's house, and when I woke up, the car was gone. I didn't report it because I thought I'd be able to find it. Did you leave it at a bar? The officer asked, lifting an eyebrow skeptically. Jackson knew he had to come up with a plausible explanation. You can call my wife. She can confirm who I am. Maybe you could give me a lift to my office so I can grab some clothes. One officer took down Molly's number and stepped aside to call her. Jackson could hear snippets of the conversation. Ma'am, this is Officer Harris with the Atlanta Police Department. We have a man here who claims to be your husband. He was trying to break into your house because he lost his. Ma'am, this is Officer Harris with the Atlanta Police Department. We have a man here who claims to be your husband. He was trying to break into your house because he lost his clothes. Yes, ma'am. We'll wait. Thank you. When the officer returned, his expression was stern. Your wife says she's in Detroit, and anyone breaking into her house is considered an intruder. But, Jackson's voice faltered as they led him to the police cruiser. Meanwhile, Caroline had driven to her office, running late but hoping to catch up on work. She still hadn't heard from Ethan and decided to call his cell phone, but there was no answer. She then dialed his office. Hi, Jenna, it's Caroline. I'm getting a bit worried about Ethan. Have you heard from him? No, I haven't. That means he's still in Chicago with the attorneys. It's really unlike him not to call. You sound worried, so I'll reach out to him. Either he or I will call you back in a few minutes. Okay, thanks, Jenna. You're a lifesaver. A few minutes later, Caroline received a call back. Caroline, it's Jenna. I spoke with a secretary at the law office. Ethan left late yesterday, hoping to catch the last flight to Atlanta. I called his cell, and he asked me to tell you he'd reach out later. Thank you, Jenna, Caroline replied, a knot forming in her stomach as she hung up. Ethan ended his call with Jenna while driving the silver Audi to a divorce attorney recommended by Fred Turner, his longtime corporate lawyer. He trusted Fred and hoped he could rely on this new lawyer too. Mr. Thorne, please have a seat. Miss Reinhardt will be with you shortly, the receptionist informed him. He sat down, feeling somewhat comforted by the look of the lawyer's office. It was neither overly opulent nor cheap-looking. Before he could dwell too much on his anxieties, a woman in her 50s with dyed red hair stepped into the reception area. "Mr. Thorne," she called out. Ethan nodded, and she continued, "I'm Anna Reinhardt. Fred called and told me to take good care of you. Let's head to my office and discuss your situation." Ethan followed her into a cozy, well-furnished office. After accepting coffee from the receptionist, he laid out his situation, his wife's infidelity, his decision to pursue a divorce, and his need to protect his financial interests, particularly the proceeds from his and his brother's business. He opted not to mention the Audi, suspecting it might amuse Anna a bit too much. "Is it okay if I call you Ethan?" she asked, and he nodded. "Good news, relatively speaking, considering your circumstances. Fred mentioned that you and your brothers owned your business prior to your marriage, so your shares are classified as separate property. Your wife has no legal claim to them, but you must keep those shares and any sale proceeds separate from joint accounts." "That makes sense," Ethan replied. "What about our house and retirement accounts?" "Not such good news there. Given your higher income, you'll likely have to pay some alimony for a few years. We can probably avoid dipping into retirement accounts by adjusting the alimony payments. I know it's not ideal, but it's better than splitting your retirement funds decades down the line. And since your sons are in college, I'm assuming you're okay covering their expenses?" "Yes, that's fine. About the house, I don't want it anymore. I doubt Caroline can buy out my share, so selling seems like the best option. I can draft the paperwork. The divorce petition is pretty standard, so I can have it ready for you to review by tomorrow. We can serve her in the afternoon, and a proposed settlement agreement can follow next week." "That's pretty quick," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. "Listen to me, Ethan. If there's still a chance for you and your wife, if counseling might be worth considering. No, it's just the shock I'm dealing with. Less than 24 hours ago, I was eager to come back home to my wife and share the news about the company sale. And now I'm here, talking about divorce. But go ahead. I'll figure out how to deal with it." "All right. But if you change your mind, just give me a call." Ethan thanked her, paid a retainer, and left her office. As he walked back to the silver Audi, he thought about the events of the previous night and the man he had seen with Caroline. Remembering that he promised to call her, he dialed her number. "Hello," she answered from her office. "Caroline, it's Ethan. You called looking for me?" "Oh, Ethan, thank you for calling. I've missed you. Where are you?" "I'm here in Atlanta. When did you get back?" "Last night," he replied, feeling the tension building. Caroline slumped back in her chair, struggling to keep the conversation going. "I'm going to hang up now." "No, please don't," Ethan urged. "Can we meet somewhere? I need to see you." Ethan hesitated. Caroline had been his love, the mother of his sons, the most important person in his life for over 20 years. "Okay, let's meet at the corner cafe at 6. The tension was palpable for Caroline as she agreed. The corner cafe was where she and Ethan had met long ago while out with mutual friends. It had been a special place for them ever since, and now she feared why Ethan had chosen it. But she couldn't refuse. "Ethan, I'll see you there. And please, listen. I'm sorry, and I love you." Ethan ended the call, and Caroline remained seated, tears streaming down her face, feeling a tightening sensation in her chest. Arriving at the cafe early, Caroline ordered a glass of wine and reflected on the past. Her hands shook slightly as she swirled the glass, thinking about her mistakes and the pain she had inflicted. She glanced around the cafe, which was nearly empty at this hour. The familiar surroundings only intensified the growing sense of loss inside her. This was where it had all begun, where she and Ethan had shared their first meaningful conversation over coffee, talking about everything and nothing until the cafe closed for the night. She remembered how he had looked at her back then, so intensely, as if she were the only woman in the world. It had been a whirlwind romance, followed by a solid partnership, a beautiful marriage, or so she had believed. When had it all changed? Was it her own restlessness, or Ethan's obsession with work? No matter how she tried to justify it, the truth was she had shattered what they had. She took a deep breath, gripping the wineglass as if it were a lifeline. The moment she saw Ethan walk in, looking as if he hadn't slept, her heart dropped. "Hello, Ethan," she whispered, barely audible as he made his way to the table. "Hello, Caroline," he replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Thank you for coming. I don't even know where to begin or how to express how deeply sorry I am." Ethan remained silent for a moment, his gaze intense and unwavering. She could see the hurt etched into his features, and it made her heart clench. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but resolute. "May I ask some questions?" "Oh, Ethan, please, no. If there's even the slightest chance for us, questions and answers will just destroy that chance," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Caroline, we need to talk. I can't just walk away without understanding everything." The tightness in her chest remained, but Caroline knew she had to face this moment head-on. "Okay, Ethan. Ask me anything. Do you know what time I got home last night?" Ethan asked, a strange look in his eyes. Caroline's breath hitched. No, not exactly." "And do you know what I saw when I walked up to our bedroom?" "Yes. I can imagine what you must have seen, and I know it was one of the worst things for you." She reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. "I beg you, please just hear me out, Ethan. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry enough that I won't contest any kind of divorce you want. If you want to confront me, do it right here, and I won't object." "Be quiet, Caroline," Ethan said softly, but the words struck her like a blow. "Next question, how many men have there been since we got married? If you lie, I'll get up and leave." Caroline's first instinct was to lie, to minimize the damage, but she knew that would be too dangerous. Their marriage already felt shattered, and another lie would obliterate any faint hope of recovery. "3, Ethan. 3 men I wish I had never met." Ethan stared at her with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. "I see in your eyes that our marriage is over, and I understand. You deserve someone better. I would do just about anything to give us another shot, but I understand if you want nothing more to do with me." "Get a lawyer," Ethan said coldly. "You'll be served with divorce papers tomorrow." He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back, and walked away. Caroline sat there, too stunned to cry at first, trying to process what had just happened. The weight in her stomach pressed down harder, and eventually, the tears flowed uncontrollably. As Ethan walked away from the cafe, he thought back to the first time he and Caroline had met there, decades ago. Now he wondered if this would be their last heartfelt conversation. The thought was bitter. Knowing she had been with other men was painful enough, but seeing her with someone else in their own bed was a wound he couldn't bear. Maybe, just maybe, he could have come to terms with her past mistakes if there had been counseling, if they had worked through it together. But the image of her with that man, smiling and snoring peacefully in their bed, it felt insurmountable. Their marriage was over, and he finally let the tears come as he sat in the silver Audi. Eventually, he realized it was getting dark. He wiped his face and thought about what Molly Hale had said that morning. She had advised him not to send her photos of her husband with Caroline, sensing that forgiveness would be more challenging with visual evidence. He decided to call her to share his thoughts and check on the status of the car. "Hello." Molly answered cautiously. "Molly, this is Ethan Thorne from this morning. I'm just checking in on you, and the car. Thanks for calling. I'm holding up. You can keep the car for now. Jackson is in so much trouble he won't need it anytime soon." "Trouble?" Ethan asked, curiosity getting the better of him. I hope you didn't hurt him. No, but he might wish I had. He got arrested for trying to break into our house and took a swing at one of the officers. He's a big guy, and the cop ended up using a taser on him. I think something else happened while he was in custody, too. He's not saying much about it, but it sounds serious. He called his brother to bail him out, so now his entire family knows everything. Wow, Molly, I can't say I'm sorry for him, but I am sorry for you. I'm glad you didn't look at those pictures this morning. If there's any chance of fixing things, seeing them would only complicate it. Yeah. He finally got home a few hours ago, crying and begging me to let him stay. We have 2 little kids, so I'm trying to work it out, but it won't be easy. His brother, who's a lawyer, advised me to insist on a post-nup, and I'll be controlling our finances for a while. Well done, Ethan said, genuinely impressed. I wish you all the best. Just let me know when you need the car back. Thanks, Ethan. Take care. After hanging up, Ethan sat there, feeling a swirl of envy and concern for Molly. Perhaps Jackson had learned a hard lesson, facing these legal troubles. He hoped it would help, at least for the sake of their kids. Eventually, Ethan drove back to the motel where he was staying. He had one more call to make before attempting to get some rest, to his sons, Sam and Jake. Hi, Dad, Jake's voice chimed in. The boys sounded so similar, both pursuing engineering degrees at the same university. Ethan often thought about how lucky he was that they weren't identical twins. They could be a challenge to handle together as it was, and he could only imagine how much tougher it would have been if they'd looked alike, too. Yeah, you guessed right. Of course, you had a 50-50 shot. What's up? Jake asked with his usual upbeat tone. Listen, tomorrow is Saturday, and I'd like to take you and your brother out for breakfast. Let's call it brunch, maybe around 11 at that cafe on Maple Street where we've been before. That's fine with me, Jake paused, and then Ethan heard some rustling sounds before his son came back on the line. It's fine with Sam too. Can we? Ethan quickly cut him off. Let's make it just the 3 of us for tomorrow, okay? Sure, Jake replied, but he hesitated. Dad, is something going on? Ethan didn't want to start a long conversation over the phone. I need to go. See you at 11. Love you, and tell your brother I love him too. Bye. He hung up, hoping they wouldn't reach out to Caroline to ask any questions. After Ethan had left the cafe, Caroline was left with his advice, or perhaps it was a warning, to get a lawyer. She struggled to stop her tears. She knew she had ruined her marriage, her family, her entire life. She feared that their sons would find out, as well as her parents and friends. The thought of Ethan discovering her in bed with another man haunted her. A waitress approached, concern evident on her face, and asked if she needed to move to the ladies' room. Caroline sniffled and managed to say, "No, thank you." She paid the bill and left, heading toward the home that wouldn't be hers much longer. When she arrived, she poured herself a drink, just enough to dull her thoughts and help her forget her troubles, hoping for some sort of miracle that would bring Ethan back to her. The next morning, Ethan sat in the cafe when his sons arrived. He had reviewed the draft divorce petition earlier that day and had spent the drive pondering how to break the news to Sam and Jake. After the usual hugs and pleasantries, the conversation took a serious turn. "Dad, we know something's wrong," Jake said. "You look kind of off. Are you here to tell us you're sick or something? If so, where's Mom?" "Yes, I do have some bad news, but it's nothing like that. No one is dying. It's about your mom," Ethan began, choosing his words carefully. Sam interrupted, his voice unsteady. "She's done something terrible, hasn't she?" "Oh my God, is she running off with one of the lawyers?" he asked, half joking. Both boys burst into laughter at the absurdity of it. But the laughter faded quickly when they realized their dad wasn't joining in. He looked at them with a sadness they hadn't seen before. Dad, no. Not Mom, Jake whispered, his eyes widening as he began to grasp what his father was implying. Boys, listen to me carefully, Ethan said softly but firmly. Yes, your mom has been unfaithful, but that doesn't mean she's betrayed you. I wish it weren't true, but it is. If her actions are breaking up our family, then yes, she's hurting all of us. Jake's eyes filled with tears, streaming down his face uncontrollably. Dad, why? He choked out, his voice cracking with emotion. Sam, always the more composed of the two, reached out to hug his brother and then turned back to Ethan, his lips trembling. Is it over? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ethan felt tears welling up in his own eyes, but he forced himself to remain strong for their sake. He nodded slowly. Yes, it's over. I've already spoken to a divorce lawyer, and your mom will be served with papers today. More tears flowed as they processed the news, followed by a long, heavy silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Is there any way to fix this? Jake asked, his voice desperate, almost pleading. Ethan shook his head sadly. I wish there were, son, but some things just can't be fixed. I'm not sure I could ever trust her again, and without trust, there's no foundation for a marriage. Sam sniffled, wiping his eyes. What does this mean for us? For college, and everything. Ethan reached across the table and took both their hands in his. As difficult as this is, you both need to focus on your schoolwork. There's enough money for your senior year at Georgia Tech, and if either of you want to pursue graduate studies, I'll find a way to support that too. But there's a catch. They exchanged worried glances. What kind of catch? Jake asked, his eyebrows knitting together. I'm happy to pay for your education, but I expect hard work and good grades in return. I know what your mom has done makes it harder to concentrate, but you told me you're grown-ups. Real grown-ups can handle adversity, right? They looked at each other, tears still in their eyes, but then they turned back to him, and Sam whispered, Yes, Dad. You're right. We'll be okay. Jake nodded in agreement, squeezing his dad's hand. We won't let you down, Dad. Ethan felt a lump in his throat, and he cleared it before speaking again. I know you won't. You're strong, and I'm incredibly proud of both of you. As for me, I'll be okay. It's going to be a tough transition, but I'll get through it. But what are you going to do? Jake asked, his voice tinged with concern. Are you going to keep working for the company? Well, you can do a lot of thinking during a 2-hour drive, Ethan replied, offering a small smile. First, I want both of you to know that I'm proud of how you've handled this. And I promise you, I'm ready to focus on helping you both start your adult lives. Okay, Dad, but that's not what I'm asking, Jake pressed, a determined look in his eyes. Are you going to be alone now? What's your plan? Well, that's a good question, Ethan said, exhaling slowly. For now, I'll get through the divorce and focus on work. After the sale of the company, I'm planning to travel. I want to try things I've never done before. Run marathons, climb mountains, sail across the Atlantic, hike the Rockies, who knows, maybe I'll even go on a safari. Both boys looked at him, astonished. This was their dad. Not some adventurous figure they'd imagined. Did you really come up with all this on your drive here? Jake asked, skepticism in his voice. Yes, partly. But also because I haven't slept much. My mind has been racing with ideas, he said, smiling sadly. I could choose to wallow in self-pity, but instead, I'm determined to make the best of this situation. Trust me, I'm going to be okay. The boys hugged him again, and Ethan felt a bittersweet warmth in their embrace. As they sat back down, Sam leaned in, a serious look on his face. Dad, I'm really worried about Mom. What's going to happen to her? I don't know, son, Ethan replied honestly. But she's going to have to deal with the consequences of her actions. She'll get through it, just like we will. But we need to help her, right? Sam asked, looking at his brother for support. I mean, she's still our mom. Yes, of course. I don't want you two to stop loving her or supporting her. But remember, she's made choices that have affected all of us, and it's important for her to face those choices. Just, be there for her, like you are for me. The three of them sat in contemplative silence for a while, finishing their brunch quietly. Eventually, they decided to take a walk around the nearby park, talking about lighter subjects and trying to lift the heavy mood. After dropping his sons off at their dorm, Ethan drove back to the motel, his thoughts a chaotic swirl. He knew he had to talk to Caroline again, but he wasn't ready for that conversation just yet, not after seeing the pain in his son's eyes. The next few days passed in a blur. The divorce papers were served, and Caroline called him repeatedly, pleading for a chance to talk. Ethan ignored her calls, his resolve hardening each time he saw her name flash on his phone screen. He knew what he had to do, move forward, no matter how painful it was. Then, a week later, something unexpected happened. While at his lawyer's office finalizing the details, Ethan received a call from Jake. "Dad, it's Sam," he said, his voice shaking. "Mom's in the hospital." Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. What? What happened? She overdosed on sleeping pills. They found her just in time. She's going to be okay, but she's really not well. Ethan closed his eyes, the news hitting him like a freight train. For a moment, he couldn't speak, couldn't think. When he finally found his voice, it was strained and barely above a whisper. "I'm on my way." He arrived at the hospital later that evening, his emotions a tangled mess of anger, guilt, and concern. Seeing Caroline lying there, pale and fragile, tubes attached to her arms, he felt something break inside him. "What were you thinking, Caroline?" he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Her eyes fluttered open, and she turned to look at him. "Ethan. I'm sorry. I couldn't handle losing everything. You, the boys. I'm so sorry." He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "This doesn't change anything between us, Caroline. But I'm glad you're still here. For the boys' sake, if nothing else." Caroline's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded weakly. "I know. I just didn't know what to do. I'm so lost, Ethan." Ethan felt a pang of sympathy, but he pushed it aside. "We're going to get you help. You need to get better. For Jake and Sam." "Thank you, for being here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He stayed with her for a while, holding her hand silently. When he left the hospital, he called his sons and reassured them that their mother was going to be okay. But as he drove back to the motel, he knew that this was only the beginning of a long, difficult road, for all of them. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, therapy appointments, and difficult conversations. Ethan did his best to shield Jake and Sam from the worst of it, but they were too perceptive not to see the cracks in everything. They came home on weekends, helping Caroline settle into a new routine and making sure she took her medications and attended her counseling sessions. Ethan, too, checked in frequently, bringing groceries, books, and other small comforts. Despite everything, he kept his distance emotionally. He still went through with the divorce proceedings, and it was finalized quietly, with Caroline signing the papers without resistance. There was no celebration, no sense of triumph, only a deep, aching sadness that permeated everything. They agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds, with Ethan taking the majority since Caroline would be receiving spousal support for a few years. He moved into a small apartment downtown, the kind of place he never thought he'd live again, not at his age. But it was easier, simpler, and that's what he needed right now. His sons visited occasionally, and they tried to fill the empty spaces with laughter and love, but it was never quite the same. One evening, after one of their visits, Ethan found himself staring out the window at the city lights, his mind drifting to the past. The divorce had left him with a sense of loss that felt bottomless, but also a strange freedom. A blank slate. No more betrayals to discover, no more secrets festering in the dark. Just him and whatever future he decided to build. He took a deep breath, then pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in weeks. Molly Hale answered on the third ring. "Hello. Molly, it's Ethan Thorne." There was a pause, and then a soft intake of breath. "Ethan, wow, I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "I wasn't expecting to call either," Ethan admitted, a hesitant smile tugging at his lips. I wanted to see how you're doing. How everything is, with Jackson and the kids." "Honestly? It's been a struggle, but we're getting by," Molly said quietly. "Jackson moved out. The kids are adjusting, but it's not easy." "I'm sorry to hear that," Ethan replied, his voice sincere. "If there's anything I can do to help." "Just talking like this helps," Molly interrupted gently. "Knowing I'm not alone in all this, it means a lot." They talked for a while longer, sharing updates and tentative laughter. When they finally hung up, Ethan felt lighter, as if some of the weight he'd been carrying had shifted. He didn't know what the future held, but maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something new, something unexpected. "Ethan? Is everything okay?" she asked, sounding surprised. "Hey, Molly. Yeah, everything's, well, as okay as it can be, I guess," he said, unsure of what he was trying to convey. "I just wanted to check in. How's everything going with Jackson?" There was a pause on the other end. "It's complicated," she finally replied, sighing heavily. "He's still at home, but we're not together." "Not really. The postnup has been signed, and I'm managing our finances now. He's on a tight leash, but we've started counseling for the kid's sake." "Do you think you'll stay together?" Ethan asked, the question coming out more personal than he intended. "Honestly? I don't know. Some days, I feel like it's possible to rebuild what we had. Other days, I just want him gone. But the kids, they need stability, and for now, this is the best we can do." Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He understood all too well the pull between trying to keep a family intact and the urge to let everything burn. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Molly," he said softly. "Thanks, Ethan. And I'm sorry for you, too. You deserve better than what happened. I mean it." They fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Molly's voice cut through the quiet. "Listen, if you ever need to talk, or just want company, you can call me. I mean it." Ethan hesitated, the weight of the offer settling between them. He had considered it before, what it might be like to see her, to have someone who understood what he was going through. But was he ready for that? Could he even handle it? "I appreciate that, Molly." "Really," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Maybe I'll take you up on it sometime." "Okay. Take care, Ethan." "You too, Molly." After hanging up, Ethan sat in silence for a long time, staring at his phone. He could have called her back. He could have asked her out to dinner, a coffee, something. But instead, he set his phone down and went to bed, the emptiness of his apartment echoing around him like a ghost of the life he once had. Months passed, and Ethan slowly started to find a new rhythm. The company's sale was finalized, and he spent his days tying up loose ends, meeting with lawyers and financial advisors to ensure everything was in order. The new owners kept him on as a consultant, but he knew it wouldn't last long. His transition period would end soon, and then he'd be free to figure out what came next. One Saturday, while browsing through a small bookstore downtown, his phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Hey, Dad. Just wanted to remind you about brunch tomorrow. 11 a.m. at the corner cafe. Don't be late. Love you." Ethan smiled at the message, a warmth spreading through him. Jake and Sam had been his anchors through the storm, and he cherished these moments with them more than ever. He responded quickly. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Love you too. The next morning, he arrived at the corner cafe early, finding a table in the back where it was quieter. As he waited, he glanced through the menu, not really paying attention. His mind wandered to the past year, the heartbreak, the anger, the quiet acceptance that had come after. He had lost so much, but he had also gained something unexpected, a deeper connection with his sons, a clearer sense of who he was and what he wanted. Dad! Jake's voice broke through his thoughts, and he looked up to see both his sons smiling at him, their faces glowing with excitement. Hey, you too. He stood and wrapped them both in a tight hug. How's my favorite set of brothers? Busy, Sam said, rolling his eyes. Studying, and more studying. But we're almost done. Yeah, and then we'll both be off saving the world, right? Jake added with a playful grin. That's right, Ethan said, his heart swelling with pride. And I know you'll both be amazing at it. They chatted and laughed, enjoying each other's company as they ordered brunch. It was a small slice of normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down. Dad, we're really proud of you, Sam said suddenly, his voice earnest. You've handled all of this way better than we ever could have imagined. Yeah, Jake agreed. You didn't just fall apart. You kept going, and we know that wasn't easy. Ethan felt a surge of emotion, his throat tightening. He glanced away for a moment, then looked back at them, smiling softly. Thank you, boys. That means a lot. I guess we're all stronger than we think. They settled into their seats, ordering their usuals and falling into an easy conversation. As they chatted, Ethan realized just how much his sons had grown, not just physically, but emotionally. They were strong, resilient, and capable. And despite everything that had happened, they still looked at him with love and respect. So, Dad, Jake said suddenly, his tone shifting. Sam and I were talking, and we had an idea. Oh, should I be worried? Ethan joked, raising an eyebrow. Not at all, Sam said, his smile widening. We think it's time for you to take that trip you talked about. Yeah, you know, the one where you climb mountains and go on safaris. Jake added, leaning forward. You deserve it, Dad. You need a break. Ethan stared at them, his chest tightening. I don't know, boys. I mean, it's not really. Don't say it's not the right time, Sam interrupted gently. It's exactly the right time. You've done so much for us and for Mom. Now it's time to do something for you. Their words hit him like a wave, and he felt his resistance crumbling. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to let go of the past and embrace whatever came next. He took a deep breath, smiling at his sons, the best parts of his life, the ones who kept him grounded. You know what? He said softly, the decision settling within him like a calm breeze. Maybe I will. The boys exchanged excited looks, and Jake grinned. Good. Because we may have already booked a few tours for you, just to get you started. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. You two really don't give me a choice, do you? Nope. Sam said, giggling. We love you too much. They spent the rest of the brunch planning and dreaming, the weight of the past slowly lifting as the future began to take shape. It wouldn't be easy, but Ethan knew he could face whatever came next, with his sons by his side and the strength he had found in himself along the way. As they hugged goodbye outside the cafe, Ethan watched them walk away, his heart full and his mind clear for the first time in a long while. He knew he had a long road ahead, but he also knew he wasn't walking it alone. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and hovered over Molly's name. With a deep breath, he hit call. Ethan. Molly answered, her voice warm and welcoming. Hey, Molly. I was wondering, are you free for dinner tonight? There was a brief pause, and then a soft laugh. I think I could be. Where are we going? Surprise me, he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in months. I'm ready for a new adventure. Okay, Ethan. I'll pick the place. See you at 7. See you at 7, he replied, hanging up and feeling lighter than he had in years. As he walked back to his car, the sun shining brightly overhead, Ethan knew one thing for certain: his story wasn't over yet. There was still more life to live, more love to find, and more mountains to climb. He was ready.